Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another very specific reading. I'm Rose, and I'm so happy you're here with me today. Before we begin, take a deep breath, quiet your mind for a moment, and allow the message meant for you to come through. Now, let's get into today's message because I feel there is something very important you need to understand about someone's silence. You may have been asking yourself the same question again and again. Why did they suddenly become quiet? Why did they pull away? Why did they stop saying what they used to say? Why did they create distance when there was clearly something between you? And perhaps the hardest question of all, did they become silent because they stopped caring? The energy coming through today tells me that the answer may be very different from what you've been assuming. Because sometimes silence isn't created by a lack of feelings. Sometimes silence is created by having too many feelings and not knowing what to do with them. And I feel that is exactly what has been happening with this person. They have been keeping a lot inside. Things they wanted to tell you, things they wanted to ask you, things they wished they could explain. But instead of speaking, they chose to retreat. They chose distance. They chose to stay quiet. And there is a reason. This person has been struggling with emotions that they did not expect to develop. When they first met you, they may not have thought you would become important to them. Perhaps they believed this would be simple, a conversation, a connection, a friendship, an attraction, something temporary. But somewhere along the way, something changed. They started paying closer attention to you. They started remembering little things you said. They noticed your expressions. They noticed the way you reacted to certain situations. They started wondering what you were doing when you weren't around. And slowly, without even realizing it, you became someone they were emotionally invested in. That realization frightened them. Because once someone realizes they genuinely care, they also realize they have something to lose. And that is where their silence began. They started asking themselves questions. What if I get too attached? What if they don't feel the same? What if I tell them the truth and everything changes? What if I become vulnerable and they walk away? What if I have misunderstood the entire connection? So instead of finding the answers, they created distance. They thought distance would make everything easier. They thought if they stopped talking to you, eventually they would stop thinking about you. They thought if they stayed busy, the emotions would disappear. They thought if they avoided the situation long enough, they would regain control. But something didn't go according to plan. The feelings didn't disappear. In fact, the silence may have made them more aware of them. Because when you were there, they could distract themselves with your presence. They could focus on the conversation. They could enjoy the moment. But when you were gone, they had their thoughts. And those thoughts kept taking them back to you. They remember things you probably don't even realize mattered. A particular conversation, a certain look, a small joke, the way you made them feel comfortable, the way you listened, the way you understood something without them having to explain it. You may have thought those moments were ordinary. They didn't. Somewhere inside their mind, those moments became memories they keep returning to. And this is why their silence feels so strange. Because outwardly, they may look like they have moved on. They may appear calm. They may seem completely unaffected. They may even act as though nothing happened. But internally, there is a completely different story. They have been thinking a lot. There is an energy of someone who has replayed conversations over and over again. Someone who wonders whether they should have said something differently. Someone who wonders whether they waited too long. Someone who wonders whether you still think about them. And they may be asking themselves whether you have already moved on. That possibility bothers them more than they want to admit. Because one of their biggest fears is that while they were trying to figure themselves out, you were quietly learning how to live without them. And that thought creates another kind of fear. The fear of losing their opportunity. They may wonder if you would even respond if they reached out now. They may wonder whether you would ask difficult questions. Why did you disappear? Why did you stop talking to me? What happened? And they don't know how to answer, because the honest answer is complicated. They may not even know how to explain it themselves. How do you tell someone that you pulled away because they started meaning too much? How do you explain that you were afraid of something becoming real? How do you admit that you weren't prepared for the emotional intensity of the connection? Sometimes it is easier to say nothing. So they said nothing. But silence doesn't erase emotion, it only hides it. And I feel that this person has been hiding behind silence for quite some time. There is also a strong feeling that they have been protecting themselves. Perhaps something happened in their past that made them afraid of vulnerability. Maybe someone broke their trust. Maybe they gave too much to someone and received very little in return. Maybe they experienced a relationship where they felt emotionally unsafe. Or maybe they simply learned from life that showing too much emotion can leave you exposed. So they developed a habit. When feelings become intense, they withdraw. When someone gets too close, they create distance. When they start caring, they become quiet. And you may have accidentally triggered that pattern in them, not because you did anything wrong, but because you reached a place in them that they usually keep protected. You made them feel something they weren't prepared to feel. And instead of allowing themselves to experience it, they tried to control it. That is why their behavior may have seemed confusing. One moment they were warm. The next moment they were distant. One day they seemed interested. The next day they disappeared. They may have given you signs and then immediately pulled those signs back. And that inconsistency wasn't necessarily because they were playing games. For some of you, it was an internal battle. Their heart was saying one thing. Their fear was saying another. And fear won for a while. But I don't think that battle is going to continue forever, because there comes a point when avoiding something becomes more painful than confronting it. And I feel this person is moving toward that point. They are becoming tired of pretending, tired of wondering, tired of keeping everything inside. There may even have been moments recently when they almost reached out. Maybe they typed something. Maybe they opened your conversation. Maybe they looked at your profile. Maybe they considered sending a simple message just to see how you would respond, and then they stopped themselves. But each time they stop themselves, the desire to communicate doesn't completely disappear, it remains, and eventually, that pressure can become too strong. For some of you, the first contact may not be dramatic, it could be something very simple. A hey, a question, a reaction, a casual excuse to start a conversation. They may act as though it means nothing, but you may sense that there is something underneath it. Because they will be testing the energy between you. They want to know whether the door is still open. They want to know whether you are angry. They want to know whether you still care. And most importantly, they want to know whether they still have a chance. But there is something I want you to remember. Do not chase them into speaking. You don't need to force a confession. You don't need to send 10 messages trying to get an explanation. You don't need to prove that you still care. If they have something to say, let them find the courage to say it. Because you deserve clarity. You deserve consistency. You deserve someone who can communicate with you instead of disappearing whenever emotions become uncomfortable. You can understand why someone became silent without accepting silence forever. Those are two different things, and I feel you are becoming much stronger about this. You may still care about them. You may still wonder about them. You may still have feelings. But you are also beginning to understand your own value. You are beginning to realize that love should not require you to constantly question yourself. And that transformation in you may actually be one of the reasons this person is becoming more aware of your absence, because perhaps they expected you to remain available. Perhaps they thought you would always be there. But now something feels different. You may have stopped chasing. You may have become quieter. You may have started focusing on yourself. And they noticed. They may be wondering why you aren't reaching out anymore, why you aren't trying to get their attention, why you seem to be moving forward. And that can create a very uncomfortable realization for someone who has been hiding. They may suddenly realize that silence has consequences. You can only keep someone waiting for so long before they begin walking in another direction. And I think that possibility is beginning to wake something up inside them. They don't want to lose you completely. They may not be ready to admit that directly yet, but they feel it. There is also something very emotional around the future of this connection. For some of you, this person may eventually come forward with an explanation. They may tell you that they were confused, that they were scared, that they didn't know what to do, that they needed time, that they were dealing with things internally, and perhaps they will finally admit that their silence was never as simple as it appeared. There was emotion underneath it. There was fear underneath it. There was longing underneath it. There was uncertainty underneath it, and perhaps even regret. They may regret the way they handled things. They may wonder whether they hurt you. They may wish they had communicated instead of disappearing. And if they do come back, listen carefully. Don't only listen to what they say, watch what they do. Words can reveal feelings. Actions reveal intention, and you deserve both. You deserve someone who doesn't just miss you in private. You deserve someone who is willing to show up, someone who can have difficult conversations. Someone who can tell you the truth, someone who doesn't make you guess where you stand. So if this person is truly meant to return to your life, allow them to demonstrate that. Don't do all the emotional work for them, let them meet you halfway. And if they finally speak, you don't have to immediately forget everything that happened. You can listen, you can understand, you can forgive, and still move at your own pace. Because this isn't only about whether they come back. It's also about whether the version of them that comes back is capable of giving you what you deserve. And that is the question I want you to hold on to. Not do they miss me, not are they thinking about me, not even will they return. Ask yourself, can they love me in a way that feels safe, honest, and consistent? Because you have already survived the silence. You have already survived the uncertainty. You have already survived the unanswered questions. And you are not going back to being the version of yourself who accepted confusion simply because you wanted someone to stay. You are stronger now. You are wiser now. And perhaps that is the hidden purpose behind this entire situation. Maybe their silence forced you to find your own voice. Maybe their distance taught you how to stop chasing. Maybe their absence taught you how to choose yourself. And maybe when they finally return, they will be meeting a completely different version of you. A version that still has a heart, but also has boundaries, a version that can love deeply without losing itself. So, beautiful souls, if you have been wondering why they chose silence, remember this. The energy suggests that their silence came from fear, confusion, emotional protection, and feelings they didn't know how to handle. It wasn't necessarily because you meant nothing. It may have been because you meant more than they were prepared to admit. But now the story is changing. Something that was hidden is becoming harder to hide. Something that was avoided is moving toward confrontation. And someone who has been quiet may eventually realize that silence can protect you from rejection, but it can also make you lose the person you were afraid to lose. So let them decide what they are going to do. You don't have to chase. You don't have to force. You don't have to wait by the door. Keep living. Keep growing. Keep becoming the person you were always meant to be. And if they truly want another chance, they will have to step out of the silence themselves, because your heart deserves an answer. Your energy deserves respect, and your love deserves someone brave enough to speak. Maybe their silence was never the final message. Maybe it was simply the chapter where they were trying to understand their own heart. And now, they may finally be ready to tell you what was really happening behind the silence.